So, how access to information doesn't work in Ethiopia. I wish the topic was how access to information works in Ethiopia and how we are probably using it or abusing it, but no, it's not. How it doesn't work is the topic, because it doesn't work. To understand this, we have to go back to how journalism functions in Ethiopia and the media landscape that we have of independent media in Ethiopia today. Independent media was introduced into the media landscape in Ethiopia 25 years ago when the current government came to power after overthrowing a military Derg, a communist regime, soon after the collapse of the Russian bloc. So the new government introduced a new bill that freed ownership of the media into the hands of private players. But with that, there was a huge mushrooming of new media, independent media or private media, however one looks at it. However, the downside of that happens to be that we went into that territory without knowing what exactly is the power of an independent media and how we should play it, because we've never had that experience before. So we took the wrong turn in abusing the power that was suddenly placed into our hand. We even jumped into producing pornographic magazines and newspapers in a conservative community that has never seen a private media before. And the government let it run to the point that the people came into the street demanding the government to shut these newspapers. So that was the first excuse for the government to turn its might against the private media. That there was a good excuse after all from a conservative society that Ethiopians are. But it didn't stop there. The government felt promulgating more proclamations into controlling the flow and the progress and our own attempts to grow while we are doing. And then came after 15 years the 2005 election, in which things took to the wrong politically, economically, in whatever sphere that we could ever think of. And that was the first taste for the government as well of opening up a contested election. So the private media completely took the side of the opposition. And the government, in the 15 years that it was in power, became very unpopular. So the private media completely sidelined with the opposition bloc, which yet again gave the government another excuse to have a complete crackdown against the media. And that was when we found ourselves being charged with treason and thrown into jail and sentenced to death. Until 2 years later, due to the international pressure, the government felt compelled to release journalists. But journalism would never be the same after that in Ethiopia, because then there is now an elaborated system of controlling the flow of information through a government-sanctioned minister office, which we call it now the Ministry of Communication Affairs. So this is an office today that gives the privilege to journalists to access information to any of government-owned institutions, to attend the function that happens between a government, whether it's a signing ceremony between a government or another government or corporate institutions and the government. You will have to go through the Ministry of Communication to be invited to even attend the face-saving signature programs that are happening between the state and anybody that's dealing with the state now. This went on to the point that the government today gives a letter to the African Union so that journalists can be accredited to participate in the yearly annual event of the African Union, a continental institution that has its headquarters in Addis Ababa, that attracts 30 to 35 heads of state and more than 200 journalists from all over the world. But Ethiopian journalists need to be first certified by the Ethiopian Government Communication Affairs Office so that we get our conference badges to attend African Union meetings. My brother over there from South Sudan is one example here as to how we were able to get access to the South Sudanese peace negotiations that were happening, that attracted the entire world and become a headline everywhere, and how Ethiopian journalists were completely unable to write a single thing because we were not privileged to get access to these events there. So what did this create in return in terms of developing investigative journalism in Ethiopia, or even well-grounded critical journalism in Ethiopia? So we find ourselves today besieged by three things to see any progress in the last, within 25 years, in the progress of the private independent media. The first one is, of course, the law that the government keep on adding more proclamations into, all in the name of regulating the flow of information, but in truth, it's restricting access to information. So we have the law, and we have our lack of access to information, and we have self-censorship. So our journalism today is besieged by these three facts. And 25 years after it's enacted or started to be practiced in Ethiopia, we cannot find any institution, any media institution that proclaims itself as an investigative media institution. We do not have any union for journalists. We had one in the beginning, but somehow it has been crushed and eliminated, and people went into oblivious presence. So there is nothing to defend journalists when the government feels like it is in its own domain to crush, to close, to arrest journalists. So we see today journalists facing courtrooms next to rapists, courtrooms next to heavy criminals, drug dealers, and killers. And we get to be sentenced into prison terms. We have now 16 journalists in jail who have been, 10 of them have been sentenced anywhere between 18 years to life in prison. Some have been lucky enough to be released due to pressures from the traditional donors, the West and Europe, but some are still languishing in prison. We have tried an attempt to organize a media council that could mediate between the government and journalists. 10 years down the line, we're not able to take it up from the ground. Somehow we managed to have it inaugurated last year, but we've been trapped with yet another bureaucratic entrapment to start functioning, the Ethiopian Media Council. So there's no council. The law criminalizes journalism in the name of defamation. And 99% of journalism students that are graduating from Addis Ababa University and many other universities are not coming into practicing journalism. They would rather go to becoming PR officers. So the progress of journalism in Ethiopia is besieged by this. If we have a little bit of leverage and we get a little bit of information to write, we practice a lot of self-censorship. You have to sit down, you have all the data, you manage to convince people to sit with you for interview, you have everything that it takes to produce a wonderful article. The minute you start writing it, you will think yourself, okay, who's going to be happy and who's going to be unhappy? And who's going to be unhappy with this, and what is his relationship or her relationship with the government? And how will that come back to me to affect my media, myself, my family? So we have to go through this self-censorship torture center to write a story at the end of the day. So this is how journalism is progressing in Ethiopia today. But the downside to that is not just for us who are trying to do the job, but also to the government. The last 1 year, there has been a persistent protest by Ethiopians that began as a protest against land grab, sanctioned by the state. But throughout the year, because it has not been addressed, the government was not, humbled enough to come down to talk to the people, it went to a call for a regime change. So 2 months ago, this protest intensified, and went out of control. The government could not kill anymore. We have had about 1,000 Ethiopians killed during this 1 year persistent protest by the two largest ethnic communities in the country, groups in the country. But in October, it was no longer possible for the government to control either the flow of information that's coming through the social media, which replaced completely the traditional media, or the people who were spilling into the street to protest against it. So the government resorted into declaring a state of emergency, which is now in effect in Ethiopia for 6 months. I doubt it will be over in April, although it should be over in April. But this state of emergency means essentially a martial law that put the army at the forefront of running the country, and that suspended more than 70% of the civilian constitution and replaced it with a military law. In it, one of the decrees in this state of emergency is publishing anything insightful, writing, publishing, communicating, sending it even via email, and giving interviews to foreign-based media regarding the state of emergency is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Unfortunately, the magazine that I have founded 6 years ago and has become somehow, against all odds, very influential, has become the first casualty. So we had to suspend the printing of Addis Standard magazine, not because we wanted to self-censor, and not because we didn't want to take the risk of publishing yet still, but we couldn't find printing presses that are willing enough to publish and give the magazine back to us. They have asked us, okay, we can publish it, print it, but if you can go back and bring a letter from the command post that is now in charge of implementing the state of emergency, saying that it's okay for us to publish your magazine, then we will print it out for you. We had to reject this on 2 grounds. One is that the command post is inaccessible. It's the army chief that's leading it. The prime minister himself is answerable to this command post. The second one is, even if it was possible to secure a letter, in principle, this was something we were not ready to submit ourselves into, because then we're asking a military command post for approval of our work to be printed. So with so much pain and wrangling, we had to terminate the print edition of Addis Standard magazine. And it has become one big blow, as the announcement was covered by all international media, which was very encouraging for us. And most of them said, now the progress of independent journalism in Ethiopia took a huge turn back. We're trying to survive by running the online platform, but even for that, we have lost our access to the internet. We're not able to get any information. We pick up the phone and call any institution, government institution, for any information. The minute we say we're from Addis Standard, the phone clings bang. So with that, we are now stuck into what kind of journalism should we lead? Because this would then force you into becoming an opinion-based rather than fact-based journalists. So we are facing that scenario today, and we hope we will be able to overcome that in the next few months, when the state of emergency is lifted, and we'll be able to go back to printing our magazine. Thank you very much.